Lewis Shaw tended not to think about the memories and lives connected in the homes he demolished. It only complicated his job. But when his crew came across an old-fashioned letter during one project, he couldn't stay detached. Its contents were so moving that he had to go digging into the writer's story. Hello, wonderful people. I'm Jamie Buck from WonderBot. And here is construction worker who finds 70-year-old letter tracks down the original writer. Before we begin, make sure you smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Lewis Shaw and his family were on the job at a client's home in Caversham, Reading, England. The family construction business, Sons Ltd, was to tear down the chimney in the 1930s semi-detached house. Everything was business as usual until one surprising find. Inside the chimney, the family of construction workers found a crumbled old letter in the rubble. It was written by a young boy named David, and he was very humbly asking for some gifts from a famous man. It read, "Dear Father Christmas, please can you send me a Rupert annual and a drum box of chalks, soldiers and Indians, slippers, silk tie, and any little toys that you have to spare. Love, David." The Christmas list is incredibly moving, especially given the time and history it was written. Lewis and his family learned that the letter was written around 1945. England survived the Second World War, as well as a great financial depression, and the economy was at last making a comeback. Many other kids might have greedily asked for lots of new toys. On the other hand, little David did not want much, filling the letter to Santa with care and many X's for kisses to the big jolly man. After uncovering it roughly 60 years later, Lewis Shaw was moved by the letter for very personal reasons. Lewis had 2 children of his own and never saw any humility on their Christmas lists. In his own words, it makes you think how we really take things for granted now. He wanted to honor little David, so Lewis decided to find him and return the letter. He figured that because the letter was a part of David's childhood, he would enjoy reminiscing about those innocent memories. But with only a first name to go on, Lewis would have to do some digging to find David. Lewis learned that the house had been in the previous family for 2 generations before the current owner bought it. With that, he and his colleagues believed that young David was the old owner's son. Lewis was able to find help from local residents who had lived in the neighborhood since the 1930s. Thinking back to life in those days, they gave Lewis some breakthrough information. The neighbors remembered little David's family and were able to provide Lewis with David's last name, Haylock. With more complete information, he hoped an internet search would bring him closer to returning the precious letter to its owner. Lewis took to Facebook to make contact with David. He posted a photo of the letter, searched the full name, and created #FindDavid. The hashtag spread across the internet, and with continued help from one particular neighbor, Lewis was able to make the connection. In just a few days, Lewis connected with David, who was no longer the little boy who wrote that charming letter. He grew up, married, and had grandchildren to write letters of their own. Still, he has never forgotten his own childhood, so he was excited to see what Lewis had in store. Lewis was right to say that the letter could bring back so many memories. David's parents bought the old house back in the 1940s and lived in it for 40 years until they passed away in 1986. To be reunited with a piece of his childhood and his beloved parents was a fantastic gift. But Lewis had more. The Shaws were given permission by the current owner to bring David back to his childhood home. There, David was met with another surprise that brought everything full circle. Before meeting with David, Lewis and his family banded together to give the senior his entire Christmas list: the Rupert annual, a drum box of chalks, soldiers and Indians, slippers, a silk tie, and some toys were all laid out before them. David's grandchildren were amazed as David. David shared his memory with BBC News. "I can remember bending down with my mother and putting the letter up the chimney and waiting for the draft to take it up. He was happy to say he could share new memories like this with his grandchildren, though it would be greatly different from his time. David's grandchildren don't write out their Christmas letters. Instead, they email, which David is happy with. Seeing as it's taken more than 70 years for the letter to get to Father Christmas, I think email is probably best, David said. He's embracing a new tradition for the holiday, while still holding on to another. With his presents he wished for finally in hand, David had no problem for Christmas Day to open them. The blissful memories from his Christmas letter had enough to hold him till then. David and Louis were able to share this special moment together with both their families. It was a proud moment for the Shaws, who had never experienced anything like it before. As traditions change, it's comforting to know that there are people who are still connected to each other, whether it's an email to Santa, a community-building hashtag, or a humble letter from a child. Another family who grew up in the shadow of World War II knew just how David felt. In the United States, seasoned journalist Yuri Berliner knew plenty about the past, yet he had one blind spot in his knowledge that greatly troubled him: his own family history. Yuri saw only one possible way to remedy this mystery. His father would have to open up. Gert Berliner, now 94 years old, came to the United States in the middle of the 20th century and worked as a photographer. Yuri knew that beforehand he lived in Germany and fled because of the Holocaust. But he never really managed to squeeze any more information out of his dad. However, Gert had to face his past when Aubrey Pomerantz, an archivist at the Jewish Museum Berlin, asked for an artifact from his childhood in Germany. They were looking for something heartfelt and personal, and Gert's mind jumped immediately to one object. All Gert's life, he owned a small toy monkey. There was nothing inherently valuable about the stuffed animal. His son didn't even know about it. And yet Gert wrestled with the decision for days before deciding to donate it to the museum. Why did it mean so much to him? Gert's parents, Paul and Sophie Berliner, gave it to him when he was just a young boy in Germany. He rode his bicycle around Berlin with the monkey clipped to his bike, until there came a time when he could no longer ride his bike through the streets. The Nazi Party gained more authority in Germany, and they increasingly oppressed Jewish citizens across the country. By 1938, police forces were rounding up entire families and sending them to concentration camps. Paul and Sophie knew they had to get their only son far away. Though they understood that there might not be any hope for their own survival, they heard about ways to save Jewish children. They had one last selfless decision. Gert's parents struck a deal with the Kindertransport, a type of underground railroad that shuttled vulnerable children out of Germany. But no parents were allowed. Most kids they accepted ended up in England. Gert never made it there. Instead, the Kindertransport sent Gert to Kalmar, Sweden. He happily spent a couple years there with almost no reminders of his former life, except for his toy monkey. This object remained one of the few ties he had to his family, especially after their letters stopped coming. Gert also carried the stuffed animal with him to New York City at age 22. Utterly alone, he struggled to make it as a photographer, but the monkey helped him think back to happier times. But now that Aubrey asked him to give it up, Gert realized that he had to do it. In 2003, he gladly donated the toy to the museum. He knew that it could educate future generations about the experience of the Holocaust, but Gert never expected it to make such a huge impression. More than a decade after Gert's donation, Erika Peterson and her mother, Agneta, visited the Jewish Museum. One room had a series of boxes with possessions of German children during World War II. They opened only one of the boxes, but gasped when they saw what it contained. Erika reached out to Yuri, who coincidentally decided to take a trip to Europe to study at the Jewish Museum's archives and see his father's monkey for himself. He agreed to meet Erika when she revealed that she had some important information about Gert Berliner. You see, Erika's mother's maiden name was also Berliner. As it turns out, two of Gert's cousins also migrated to Sweden through the Kindertransport. However, they lost touch with Gert early on and built new lives in Sweden. Agneta was one of their daughters. Yuri could barely wrap his head around this idea. He had to meet with Erica and Agneta. Further conversation proved the truth behind all their theories. Yuri embraced his long-lost Swedish cousins. He couldn't wait to tell his father. When Gert had a photography exhibit on display in Berlin, Yuri arranged for Agneta and Erica to meet him in person. Gert had never had any extended family. At long last, found some other Berliners. Gert's health sadly prevented him from visiting all his Swedish relatives, but Yuri made the trip for both of them. He celebrated the Swedish holiday of Midsummer Eve, surrounded by friendly faces and good food. Yuri's discoveries about his father's past didn't stop there either. Yuri also got to meet Klaus Furstenberg, the grandson of one of the Swedish families that housed Gert before he immigrated to the United States. Yuri and Klaus became fast friends, and Yuri got even more insight into his father's early life. He gained a new perspective about what a godsend Sweden was for his dad, and how much he owed to these strangers. Gert, pictured below in the middle, happily lived with his Swedish stepbrothers, one of whom was Klaus's own father. For the Berliners, a small stuffed monkey not only brought a father and son closer together, it also showed them they were not alone in the world. "It's a gift," Gert said. "In my old age, I have discovered I have a family."